Welcome to Maud Lewis Paint Night. Thank you so much for being here. Today we are going to be painting Two Deer in Winter by the maritime favorite Maud Lewis. You all have a photo of this painting in front of you, so hopefully that will help, and I will guide along with this video. To start, we are going to go in with a nice layer of white to get that nice blanket of snow started. It doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe wet your brush ever so slightly. I'm using the large 1-inch brush or 2-inch brush. And I just have a little bit of white on my brush here. And I'm just putting it everywhere, all over the canvas. Some of you may be thinking, my canvas is already white. Why do I have to paint it white? The white layer on the canvas, when you get the canvas, is actually a primer, and over time it will turn yellow. So we are going to put a nice base layer of white down on the canvas. Doesn't need to be too thick or perfect. We just want to get that nice coverage of white so that we have that nice base for the snow that Maud has in her painting. Once you feel good about your base layer of white, you can pick up your canvas, you can wave it around, you can fan it a little bit. We want the paint to get a little bit tacky because this is our base layer and we're going to be adding more layers on top of this. So we want to make sure that it's nice and tacky so that the paint that we're going to add will just overlay it nicely without mixing with that white underneath. So take a moment and shake that painting, kind of fan it so that we can let that top layer become a little bit tacky. Once your canvas is reasonably tacky and dry, we're going to go in with the yellow. Now with the yellow, we are actually sort of creating the horizon line. So if you look at those hills in that photo, how they sort of roll, that's sort of the shape that we're looking to make with the yellow. We're sort of roughing that in. Doesn't have to be exact because we'll define it more with the dark green once we bring that into the picture. So I'm just putting some yellow down in that top area and I'm just loosely roughing in that horizon line, which don't worry about it being perfect because we will refine it once we bring in the dark green. You will also notice that the yellow sky is reflecting in a little lake sort of in the center of the painting. And I'm actually going to use my medium-sized brush for this. I'm going to dip my brush in the yellow and I'm just going to map out approximately where that yellow pond is. And the size can just be approximate and the positioning because we'll be crowding trees around it. And when the trees come in and the deer come in, we can position them any way that works with the painting that is in front of you. While I have the yellow on my brush, I'm going to dip my brush in the red. Just a little bit of red. We're going to make orange, and while the yellow is still a little bit wet, we're going to make orange with red and yellow, and we're going to streak that across the base of our sky and the top of our little pond. So I'm mixing a small amount of red with a little bit more yellow. And once you've reached the orange that you're happy with, you can start going into your painting into the sky with that orange. Maud just kind of has it streaking across the bottom of the horizon. The sun must be setting. Don't worry about being too exact. Skies are always sort of nondescript. They can literally be any which way, and it can be brushy, it can be smooth, it can be however you want it to be. If you want to make your orange a little bit darker, you can add a tiny bit more red. A little bit of red goes a long way. So I added a little bit more red to the orange that I used in my sky, and I'm just going to come into my little pond and add that reflection. Maybe I'll add a few little streaks of that darker orange in the sky to give some variation. But again, it doesn't have to be perfect. These are our base layers. They're what's going to be at the back of our scene, and everything's going to crowd around it. So don't be too fussy with your approach. Skies vary, waves and water vary. These are base layers. To define our landscape a little bit more, we're going to start with those light blue shadows that are cast by the trees. We'll add the trees in afterwards, but to define our landscape a little bit more and the path that the deer are on, we're going to get into that light blue on the left and right side of the lower part of the painting. So if you mix a very small amount of blue with white, you'll get sort of a nice baby blue color, and you'll just define that path that the deer are on. And it's just a triangle, so not too bad to paint. We're going to do that on both sides. And fill those areas in with your light blue. The dark blue goes a long way, so you definitely only need a small amount. And just fill in those triangular areas that will define the path that the deer are on. There's also a little bit of a shadow under the pond, so you can add that in now. And there's a shadow on the whole other side of the pond that we can add in here. Again, don't worry about being too precise because we'll be adding trees into this scene, and it'll blend everything together. Once your shadows are down, give your painting another shake just to tack up the paint a little bit because those trees will be layering on top of it. So give your painting a chance to get a little bit tacky So when we go in to add that green, it won't mix with the light blue. Also, it'll give a chance for your yellow and orange to dry before we define the hills in the background with the dark green. Next, I'm going to mix a very, very small amount of black with my darker green. Again, black, like all the dark colors so far, goes a very, very, very long way. I just want to slightly darken my green. I can even use a little dip of brown. But again, those dark colors go really far, so you don't need a whole lot to darken the lighter colors on your palette. So I've mixed a small amount of black, a little bit of brown with my darker green, and I'm gonna go in and define that horizon line that I started when I did the yellow and the orange sky. So we're just going to follow that line, and that will be our horizon line. And Maud has just defined the tops of the hills, sort of like a horizon shadow. So just keep it to that line that defines the horizon. If you're finding that your line isn't dark enough, let it dry and you can always go in and add another layer. Maud shows a few little hills that crest in the distance, so I'll add some of those. You don't have to if you don't want to. If you want to add some more bumps in your horizon, you can to add a little bit more depth and dimension. It's completely up to you. Just define that horizon line until it's reaching a point where it's working with your painting. And again, if it's not darkening up because there's white underneath, we can always go back in later and add another layer of that color to darken it up and make it more defined. So while I have that green on my brush, I'm going to take advantage of that and start painting in some of these trees that Maud has in the middle ground. So Maud sort of has a line, and then she kind of has all the branches coming out like that, sort of in V shapes away from the line. And of course, if you'd rather do a Bob Ross style tree, you can. However you'd like to define those trees is perfectly fine. And again, if they're not dark enough, we can always go back in and do another layer. If you want to add dimension, you can add some lighter green on top of a dark base layer. It's however you want your painting to feel. You don't have to put your trees in the exact same spots as Maud Lewis's. If you want to put yours elsewhere or have more or have less, it is completely up to you. They are choices that you can make as the artist of this painting. For me, I'm leaving a little bit of room for some lighter colored trees like Maud's doing. And I'm just moving over to the other side and I'm going to keep putting in some of those trees. You can also use your smaller paintbrush if you think that would give you more detail. These are your trees. They can look however you want them to. Accidents happen. As you can see, a little bit of green fell on my snow shadow, so I can always go back in with that blue color. Paint is a very forgiving medium, and I can just paint over that so that it's back to the color I want it to be. Now that I have some darker trees defining that middle ground in our scene, I'm going to start adding some of the lighter green trees, making sure that I'm leaving room for those red houses because the red houses are where we are going to go next. So I'm using my smaller brush this time. You can continue using your medium-sized brush. It is completely up to you. Sometimes it's nice to layer on top of trees that you've already painted in because it really gives a sense of depth and a sense of dimension. And it kind of makes them feel like they're huddled together, branches overlapping, just like you'd find in a real forest. Once you're happy with your trees, you can go back and forth actually between the dark and the light. I might actually add another tree in here just to fill that space. But once you're happy with your trees, give that painting a shake one more time so that we can tack those green trees up before we start moving in to the little red houses. We're going to do the red houses first so that once we know how they're spaced, we can add trees in later to fill the gaps. It's okay if yours doesn't look exactly like Maud's. We can fill in the trees however it works for the painting in front of you. Next, we're going to go in and add those little red houses. If you're painting the way it is right now, we'll only fit 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't matter. Choose the number of those red houses that you want to include. but it does not have to look exactly like Maud's. Just work with the painting in front of you and put however many trees will fit in your landscape. I'm using my smaller brush since these are smaller details. Or a brush that is kind of pointed works really well. And I'm just starting with the rectangular base of the house. And we're gonna go in with the roofs later. So I'm just going to add a triangle where that roof line is and just define that little red building. If your roofs touch the hillside in the back, that is completely fine. It just pushes that hillside back like it's background. That is completely fine. So while my red houses dry, I'm going to mix up a light brown color for the lighter parts of the deer. So to make the light brown, I took a little bit of yellow, a tiny bit of red, and mostly white. So you'll add a little bit of yellow, a tiny amount of red, and white to your brown. And that will give you a lighter brown color. If you want to make it easy, you can also just mix white with your brown. That works too. So I'm going to start by defining the back of my deer. So it's just sort of a round shape. I'm using my medium brush. And I'm just defining the backs of those deer. Sort of like a half moon shape because we're going to leave room for the tail. Or you can add the tail afterwards if it's easier to just fill the whole thing in. And with my smaller brush, I'm going to go in and define the legs. So I have one leg coming down from each part of my sort of half moon type shapes. And then the other legs will just be offset from there. So I'll add one there. And they're going to be slightly shorter than the other ones since they're in the front. They don't have to be exact. Mods are pretty basic. We're just getting the rough outline of a deer. Once you're happy with the body shape of your deer, you can go ahead and add the head. And that's just sort of an oblong shape above the body that you just made. This will likely overlap with the shore of your little pond, and that's okay because the deer's head makes that seem like it's in the distance, and it will create some depth for us in our paintings. While the deer in their current state are drying, I'm going to mix a little bit of black, a very small amount, with my darker brown color. I want somewhat of a dark brown because I'm gonna start painting those brown trees that have no leaves on them. And they sort of have a bit of a silhouette quality to them because it seems like the sun is shining towards the viewer. So I am just going to mix up a dark brown by adding a little bit of black to the brown color on the palette. We'll also use this for the deer's ears and their tail. So these trees don't have to be exact. I'm just gonna start with a trunk. And just let the branches sort of grow upwards. And gradually get smaller as we move outwards on our tree. Doesn't have to be exact. Every tree is different, so don't worry about being exact with your branches. Just keep adding more and more gradually, and then your tree will begin to take shape. And Maud kind of has hers extending all the way to the top of the painting, so you can really get some nice detail as your tree grows outwards. I'm using my small brush for this. It's easier as you get to the small branch areas. Again, it doesn't have to be exact. Just let that tree grow. Follow the branch patterns that emerge as you add more. And if you don't want to take it all the way to the top of the painting, that is completely fine. The trees on the left extend all the way from that shadowed area in the foreground all the way up to the horizon in the background. And it casts such a nice silhouette for the whole painting. And it really frames the deer. So just keep letting those trees grow. Keep letting those trees grow however works for your painting. And slowly but surely, the branches kind of fill in that side part of the painting, and the silhouettes and all the trees really frame the deer walking up the pathway. Now, while we have the dark brown on our brush from the silhouette trees, we can define our deer. So we'll go in and add the ears. So they sort of have a semicircle of dark brown on the crown of their head, and then 2 little ears. Now that we've added the ears, we can go ahead and add the tail. If you need to add some white in the middle of your tail, that is completely fine. We'll just define it now. It's sort of an eye shape. And while we have that dark color on our brush, we can dip our brush, our small one, into black, and we can define the windows and doors on those red buildings. You don't have to add the windows and doors exactly like mods. You can put them wherever they make sense on your buildings. While we have our brush in dark paint as well, we can add the hooves to the deer if you haven't already. So I'm just painting the ends of the deer's legs with the dark brown, or you can do it in black, whichever you prefer. And then I'm going to clean my brush really, really, really well, because we are going to add more of that light blue detail. We're going to add the roofs on the houses, and we're going to add the footprints of the deer. So I'm going to take a very small amount of the dark blue and mix it with my white. Make sure your brush is really, really clean after this, since we just used a dark color. And for the deer's little footprints, I'm just gonna do like Maud did. Just add a line of footprints below each leg. While we have the light blue, I'm also going to add the shadows by the houses. They don't have to be exact because these are snowdrifts up against the houses. And I'm also going to add all of the roofs. Because they all have snow on them. And just follow the form that you created earlier in those red houses. And add those roofs. Now those houses look like they are sort of nestled in snow. While our brush is relatively light, we will rinse it off really, really, really well. And we're going to go back into the white so we can finish off those deer. So dip your paintbrush into the white paint and fill in that tail. And if you want to add the antlers on the other deer, or sorry, on the right side deer, you can do that now as well. These are kind of like the tree branches, just on a smaller scale. So that concludes our deer. Now to put the finishing touch on our paintings. We'll go back into the greens and go back to our tree painting technique and add trees around those houses. Add trees around those houses to fill the space and kind of make it feel like those houses are nestled in the trees. You can add as many or as few as you like, and varying the colors of green will give it lots of dimension. I'm using my small brush since these trees are relatively small. Just makes those little branches a little bit easier. They don't have to be exact. We're just making those houses feel like they're nestled in the trees. And I'm mixing up the greens that I'm using to give us a sense of depth. And it's okay if some of the trees overlap with one another. Maud has a little bit of yellow in her trees as well. If you want to add a little bit of yellow to your light green, you can get the same effect. If you want to add any of those extra colors into your trees in the front to add some light, you can. Once you're happy with the amount of trees around your houses, Feel free to touch up any other areas of your painting that you think need a little bit more paint coverage, like your tree silhouettes if they weren't quite dark enough, or some of the red on the houses or the bodies of the deer. Fill in any little gaps that you see fit. By now, all of your paintings should be taking wonderful shape. My favorite thing about paint night is that we're all painting the same thing, but everybody ends up with their own special painting. They all look a little bit different and they all look awesome. Thank you so much for coming and following along. Maud would be proud of you all. Have a great night and take care.